The steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, masking the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Sarah looked down at the 3 tiny bundles in her arms. Liam, Noah, and Emma, her miracle triplets, only an hour old. She looked up, expecting to see tears of joy in her husband's eyes. Instead, Richard Dawson stood at the foot of the hospital bed, checking his Rolex. He didn't look at the babies. He looked at Sarah, reached into his briefcase, and tossed a thick envelope onto the crisp white sheets. "Sign these," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I'm not paying for 3 mistakes. I'm done." He walked out before the ink on the birth certificates was even dry, leaving his wife destitute. But Richard didn't know one crucial fact. The woman he just abandoned had just become the sole heiress to the sterling billion-dollar dynasty, and payday was coming. The fluorescent lights of the maternity ward at St. Jude's Hospital hummed with an irritating buzz, a stark contrast to the exhaustion weighing on Sarah Miller's eyelids. Her body felt like it had been run over by a freight truck. 3 babies, triplets. The doctors had called it a high-risk pregnancy, a medical marvel that she had carried them to 35 weeks. Now they were here, 3 red-faced, squirming miracles wrapped in hospital-grade blankets. "They're perfect, aren't they, Rick?" Sarah whispered, her throat dry. She shifted slightly, wincing as the stitches from her C-section pulled tight. She looked toward the window where her husband of 4 years, Richard Dawson, was standing. Richard was a handsome man, the kind of man who spent more time staring at his reflection in store windows than looking at his wife. He was wearing his charcoal grey suit, the one he wore for closers at his real estate firm. He turned around, but his face wasn't softened by fatherhood. It was hard, stony. "They're loud," Richard said flatly. He took a step closer, but not to see his children. He stopped at the foot of the bed. "And expensive." Sarah blinked, confusion fogging her brain. "What? Rick, we talked about this. We knew it would be tight for a while, but—" "No, you talked about it," Richard interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You talked about making it work. You talked about family. I talked about how my career is just taking off and how I can't be anchored down by a litter of screaming dependents." The air left the room. Sarah instinctively pulled the babies closer to her chest. "Anchored down? These are your children, Richard." Richard let out a scoff, a cruel, dismissive sound. He reached into his leather briefcase, the one Sarah had saved up for 6 months to buy him for his promotion, and pulled out a manila envelope. He tossed it onto the bed. It landed with a heavy thud next to baby Noah's head. "Divorce papers," Richard stated. "My lawyer, Mr. Coburn, drafted them this morning while you were in surgery. I'm generous, Sarah. I'm letting you keep the debt." You're divorcing me?" Sarah's voice trembled. The heart monitor began to speed up, mirroring her rising panic. "Now? I just gave birth an hour ago." "Best time to rip the Band-Aid off," Richard said, checking his watch again. "Look, I have a flight to catch. I'm moving to the city. The suburbs don't suit a man of my trajectory." "Is there someone else?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Richard smirked. It was a look of pure arrogance. "Tiffany, my boss's daughter. She appreciates a man with ambition. She doesn't smell like spit-up and poverty." Tears hot as magma spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "You can't do this. We have nothing. How am I supposed to feed 3 babies alone?" "That sounds like a you problem," Richard said, adjusting his tie. "I'm leaving the car in the lot, but the lease is up next week. Good luck, Sarah. You were always too boring for the big leagues anyway." With that, Richard Dawson turned on his heel and walked out of the hospital room. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye to his sons or his daughter. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was heavier than the entire world. Sarah looked at the papers. Petitioner, Richard Dawson. Respondent, Sarah Miller. She was alone, unemployed, recovering from major surgery, and responsible for 3 human lives. The next 6 months were a blur of grey desperation. Sarah didn't move back into their apartment. Richard had cancelled the lease as he promised. Instead, she found herself in a cramped, drafty basement studio in the worst part of East Oakland. The walls were thin, peeling with damp paint that smelled of mildew and despair. The sound of sirens was their lullaby. Her days were a cycle of feeding, changing, and crying. Liam was colicky. Emma had issues latching. Noah was the quiet one, watching her with big, soulful eyes that looked too much like his father's. Every time Sarah went to the grocery store, it was a battle of mathematics. She stood in the aisle at Walmart, a calculator in one hand and a can of generic formula in the other. Formula, 9 10 $2 North Star 2 states. Diapers $24.50. Rent, due in 3 days. She had $42 balls in her bank account. I'm sorry, she whispered to the cashier, a kind older woman named Brenda who had seen Sarah count out nickels and dimes before. I have to put the wipes back. Honey, take them, Brenda said quietly, checking over her shoulder for the manager. I'll swipe my employee card for the discount. You look like you haven't slept in a week. I haven't, Sarah admitted, forcing a weak smile. When she got back to the basement, she turned on the small, crackling TV she had found on a curb. It was her only connection to the outside world. The local news channel was doing a segment on the city's rising stars in real estate. Sarah froze. There, on the screen, beaming with a glass of champagne in his hand, was Richard. He looked tanned, fit, and wealthier than ever. Hanging on his arm was Tiffany Stone, a blonde woman with a smile that looked like it cost more than Sarah's entire life savings. It's all about vision, Richard was saying to the reporter. You have to cut the dead weight if you want to fly. I made some hard choices this year, but look at where I am. I'm engaged to the love of my life, and we just closed on the waterfront penthouse. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. Dead weight. That's what he called them. That's what he called Liam, Noah, and Emma. He hadn't paid a cent of child support. Every time she tried to serve him papers, he dodged the process servers or had his high-powered lawyers delay the hearing. He was starving her out, hoping she would just give up and disappear. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were chapped and raw from washing bottles in harsh dish soap. She felt a surge of anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, hardening kind. The kind that turns coal into diamond. You think we're dead weight, Rick? She whispered to the flickering screen. Watch me. Just then, a knock rattled the flimsy wooden door of the basement. Sarah jumped. It was late. Nobody visited her. She wiped her eyes and walked cautiously to the door. Who is it? Delivery for Sarah Miller, a deep, professional voice called out. I didn't order anything. I have no money, she shouted back, keeping the chain lock on. It's not a package, ma'am. It's a legal correspondence. Requires a signature. From the law offices of Abernathy and Graves. Sarah frowned. Abernathy and Graves? That sounded expensive. Was Richard suing her? Was he trying to take the kids now that they were past the hard newborn stage, just to hurt her? She opened the door a crack. A tall man in a dark trench coat stood there, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. He didn't look like a process server. He looked like a butler from a movie. Are you Sarah Miller? Daughter of the late Clara Miller? Yes, Sarah said, confused. My mother died when I was 5. I was raised in foster care. What is this about? The man offered a small, sympathetic smile. May I come in, Miss Miller? It pertains to your maternal grandmother, a woman named Beatrice Sterling. I don't know a Beatrice Sterling. She knew you, the man said, and she has been watching you for a very long time. She passed away 3 days ago. I am the executor of her estate. Sarah let him in, moving a pile of laundry off the only chair she owned. The man sat down, looking out of place in the squalor. But he showed no judgment. He opened the envelope and pulled out a document that smelled of old paper and money. Ms. Miller, he began, your mother, Clara, ran away from home when she was 18 because she fell in love with a man her family didn't approve of. She was disowned by the Sterling family, one of the oldest oil and tech dynasties in Texas. Sarah's jaw dropped. My mother was an heiress? She was. And when she died, your grandmother, Beatrice, lost track of you in the foster system. She spent 20 years looking for you. She found you 6 months ago. 6 months ago? Sarah whispered. That was when the triplets were born. Precisely, the lawyer nodded. Beatrice was a hard woman. She wanted to see if you had the strength of a Sterling. She knew about your husband leaving. She knew about the poverty. She wanted to step in, but her health failed rapidly last week. However, she updated her will before she passed. The lawyer slid a piece of paper across the scratched coffee table. The Sterling Trust was set to be divided among various charities, but Beatrice changed it. She left everything to her only surviving blood relative. You. Sarah looked at the numbers on the page. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and looked again. It wasn't thousands. It wasn't millions. It was 1.2 billion, including a controlling stake in Sterling Industries, a portfolio of real estate in Manhattan and London, and a private island in the Caribbean. This is a mistake, Sarah stammered. No mistake, the lawyer said. But there is a condition. Beatrice hated weakness. She hated men who prey on women. The will stipulates that for the first year, you must not reveal your identity publicly. You must operate from the shadows. She wanted you to learn the business, and perhaps settle some scores. Sarah looked at the babies sleeping in the crib she had found at a garage sale. Then she looked at the TV, where Richard was still smiling his shark-like smile. A fire ignited in Sarah's chest. The fear was gone. The desperation evaporated. Mr. Abernathy, was it? Sarah asked, her voice steady for the first time in months. Yes, ma'am. How quickly can I access the funds? Immediately. I have a black card here with a $5 million limit for your immediate expenses. The rest will be transferred once you sign. Sarah took the pen. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a flourish. Excellent, Abernathy said. What is your first order of business, Ms. Sterling? Sarah stood up. She looked at the TV screen one last time. My first order of business, Sarah said, her eyes narrowing, is to buy the building Richard Dawson just moved into. And then, I want to buy the company he works for. The transition from the basement in East Oakland to the Sterling estate in Hillsborough was not just a change of address. It was a change of dimensions. Sarah sat in the back of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, the leather seats soft as butter. Next to her, in 3 state-of-the-art car seats, Liam, Noah, and Emma slept soundly, lulled by the vehicle's silent engine. They were clean, fed with the most expensive organic formula money could buy, and dressed in soft cotton onesies that didn't have stains or holes. They pulled up to the gates of the estate, a sprawling 20-acre property hidden behind high stone walls and ancient oak trees. It had been her grandmother's sanctuary. Now, it was her fortress. We have a full staff waiting, Miss Sterling, Abernathy said from the front seat. 2 night nurses, a pediatric specialist, a chef, and a security team. You need to sleep for a week. We will handle the diapers." Sarah looked at him, her eyes welling up. "I don't know how to be rich, Abernathy. Yesterday I was washing Ziploc bags to reuse them." "Wealth is a skill, Sarah," Abernathy replied, turning to look at her. "Like anything else. You will learn. But first, you must heal. You cannot fight a war when you are bleeding." And heal she did. For the next 3 months, Sarah vanished from the world. To Richard and the rest of society, Sarah Miller was a ghost, likely drowning in welfare paperwork somewhere. But inside the walls of the Sterling estate, a metamorphosis was taking place. The first month was physical. With the help of the night nurses, Sarah finally slept. The dark circles under her eyes vanished. A personal trainer and a nutritionist worked with her daily. It wasn't about vanity. It was about rebuilding the strength Richard had sapped from her. She cut her hair, the long, stringy brown hair that Richard always said looked messy, into a sharp, chic bob that framed her jawline. She traded her oversized sweatpants for tailored silk and cashmere. The second month was intellectual. Sarah spent 12 hours a day in her grandmother's library. She wasn't just reading novels. She was devouring corporate law, market trends, and real estate strategies. Abernathy brought in tutors, sharks from Wall Street, who taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to spot a lie in a ledger, and how to hostilely take over a company without anyone noticing until the ink was dry. "Richard thinks he knows real estate because he sells condos," Sarah said one evening, looking over a map of the city's zoning laws. "But he doesn't understand ownership. He's a middleman." "Precisely," Abernathy said, pouring her a cup of tea. "And middlemen are expendable." The third month was strategic. "It's time," Sarah said one morning over breakfast. She was feeding Emma, who was giggling and grabbing at Sarah's pearl necklace. "What is the status of Apex Realty?" Abernathy opened his tablet. "Arthur Stone, Tiffany's father, is looking to sell. The market has dipped slightly, and Stone wants to retire to Florida. He's looking for a private buyer. He wants to keep the sale quiet to avoid panicking the investors." "Does Richard know?" "No. Richard is currently the top sales agent. He expects to be named partner by the end of the year. If Stone sells, Richard assumes he will be the natural successor to run the firm." Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard a twig snap. "Buy it," Sarah commanded. "The whole firm?" "Everything. The brand, the buildings, the client list, and the employment contracts, especially the employment contracts. Use the shell company, Obsidian Holdings. I don't want my name on anything yet." "It will cost $300 million, Abernathy warned. "Do it." "And Abernathy?" "Yes, ma'am." "Schedule a meeting with Arthur Stone. Tell him the new owner wants to throw a transition gala to meet the team. Tell him attendance is mandatory." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out over her manicured gardens. Somewhere in the city, Richard was probably waking up in his penthouse, kissing Tiffany, and thinking he was the king of the world. "Enjoy your breakfast, Richard," she whispered. "It's going to be your last peaceful meal." The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was dripping in crystals and gold. It was the night of the Apex Realty Gala, an event usually reserved for patting agents on the back. But tonight the air was thick with tension. Rumors were flying. Arthur Stone had sold the company. Nobody knew who the buyer was. Richard Dawson stood near the open bar, holding a whiskey neat. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo, but his eyes were darting around the room nervously. Beside him, Tiffany Stone was pouting. She was wearing a dress that was too tight and too sparkly, trying desperately to be the center of attention. Daddy won't tell me anything, Tiffany whined, sipping her champagne. He just said the new owner is formidable. What does that even mean? Are they going to fire people? They won't fire me, Richard said, adjusting his cufflinks. He forced a confident laugh. I brought in 40% of the firm's revenue last quarter. If anything, this new owner will promote me. They need someone who knows the operations. Your dad was getting old, Tiff. We need new blood. This is good for us. I hope so, Tiffany said. I want that summer house in the Hamptons you promised. You'll get it, Richard assured her. But his hand shook slightly as he drank his whiskey. He had leveraged himself to the hilt to maintain their lifestyle. If his commission structure changed, he was in trouble. Suddenly, the music stopped. The chatter in the room died down. Arthur Stone took the stage. He looked relieved, like a man who had just offloaded a heavy burden. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur spoke into the microphone. As you know, change is the only constant in this business. It has been my honor to lead Apex Realty for 30 years. But the time has come for a new vision. I am thrilled to introduce you to the chairwoman of the acquiring firm, Obsidian Holdings. Please welcome Ms. Sterling. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the crowd. Sarah walked in. She was unrecognizable from the exhausted, broken woman in the hospital bed 6 months ago. She was wearing a custom-made emerald green gown that hugged her figure, made of silk that looked like liquid money. Around her neck was a diamond necklace that cost more than the entire building they were standing in. Her dark hair was sleek, her makeup flawless, her posture regal. She didn't walk. She glided. Abernathy walked 2 steps behind her, looking like her personal guard. Richard squinted. He felt a strange jolt of recognition in his gut, a déjà vu that made his skin crawl. But he dismissed it instantly. This woman was power personified. His ex-wife was a woman who clipped coupons and wore oversized t-shirts. They couldn't be the same species, let alone the same person. "Who is that?" Tiffany hissed, jealousy radiating off her. "She thinks she's royalty or something." Sarah took the stage. She didn't smile. She looked out over the sea of faces, the 200 employees of the company she now owned. Her eyes locked onto Richard for a split second, cold and dead, before moving on. "Good evening," Sarah said. Her voice was lower, trained to command a room. "My name is Miss Sterling. Effective immediately. Apex Realty is under new management. We will be auditing every department. We will be cutting inefficiencies. And we will be rewarding integrity." She paused on the word integrity. "Enjoy the evening. I look forward to speaking with each of you." She walked off the stage, and the room erupted in whispers. Richard, sensing an opportunity to secure his position, grabbed Tiffany's hand. "Come on," he said. "I'm going to introduce myself. First impressions are everything." "She looks like a bitch," Tiffany muttered, but she followed. Sarah was standing near a fountain, holding a glass of sparkling water. She saw Richard approaching. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of ice. Showtime. "Ms. Sterling?" Richard projected his best salesman voice, smooth, charming, slightly flirtatious. "I'm Richard Dawson, top senior agent here at Apex, and this is my fiancée, Tiffany Stone." Sarah turned slowly. She looked at Richard's extended hand, but didn't take it. She let him hang there for an awkward 3 seconds before giving a curt nod. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I've reviewed your file. Your numbers are adequate." Richard blinked. Adequate? He was a star. "Well, I think once you see my closing ratios for this month, you'll be impressed. I know this market better than anyone." "Do you?" Sarah asked, tilting her head. I find that men who are overconfident often miss the details. Details are expensive, Mr. Dawson. Richard chuckled nervously. I assure you, I don't miss details. I'm a man of focus. I don't let distractions get in my way. Distractions, Sarah repeated. Is that what you call family? Richard stiffened. I'm sorry? I see on your HR file you have dependents listed, or rather, you did. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Oh, that. A clerical error. Past history. I'm fully dedicated to the firm. No strings attached. Sarah felt a white-hot rage burn in her stomach, but she converted it into fuel. He had just denied the existence of Liam, Noah, and Emma to save face with a stranger. I see, Sarah said. She turned her gaze to Tiffany. And you must be Arthur's daughter. The designer? Yes, Tiffany said, puffing out her chest. I staged all the luxury listings. We'll be reviewing the staging budget, Sarah said flatly. I find the current aesthetic a bit tacky. We'll be moving in a more sophisticated direction. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Her face turned bright red. Richard stepped in, his protective instinct kicking in only because Tiffany was his connection to the old power. Now wait a minute. Tiffany has great taste. Mr. Dawson, Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp as a whip. You are speaking to your employer. Do not interrupt me. The authority in her voice silenced him instantly. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a second he saw the eyes, the shape of them. Sarah, his mind whispered. No, his logic screamed back. Sarah is broke. Sarah is a loser. This woman is a billionaire. My apologies, Miss Sterling, Richard muttered, lowering his head. I want you in my office Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, Sarah said. Bring your client portfolio. We need to discuss your future at this company, if you have one. She turned her back on them and walked away. Richard stood there, sweating in his tuxedo. The summer house in the Hamptons suddenly felt very far away. I hate her, Tiffany cried, stomping her foot. Daddy never spoke to me like that. Shut up, Tiffany, Richard snapped, his eyes glued to the retreating figure of the woman in green. He grabbed another whiskey. I need to figure out who she is. She knows something. From the balcony above, Abernathy watched the scene unfold. He spoke into his earpiece. Phase 1 complete, Ms. Sterling. He is rattled. Sarah's voice came back through the comms, cool and steady. Good. Now let's take everything he has. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Richard Dawson walked into the Apex Realty skyscraper at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, intending to show the new Ms. Sterling that he was a man of discipline. He pressed the elevator button for the 40th floor, the executive suite where his corner office, with its panoramic view of the bay, was located. The button didn't light up. He pressed it again. Nothing. The security guard in the lobby cleared his throat. Mr. Dawson, your clearance has been updated. You're no longer on the 40th floor. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? My office is up there. My awards are up there. Not anymore, sir. Facilities moved your personal effects over the weekend. You're stationed on the 4th floor now. The bullpen. Richard's face went pale. The 4th floor was for interns and the telemarketing team. It was a windowless purgatory of grey cubicles and fluorescent despair. He took the elevator down, his heart pounding. When the doors opened, the noise hit him. Phones ringing, people shouting, the smell of burnt coffee. He marched to the manager's desk, but before he could scream, his phone buzzed. An email from Office of the Chairwoman. Subject: Performance Review. Location: Executive Boardroom. Time: now. Richard spun around and took the service elevator back up to the boardroom. He burst in, out of breath. Sarah sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She was reviewing a stack of files. Abernathy stood by the window. "You're late," Sarah said, not looking up. "You moved my office," Richard exploded. "I am the top earner in this company. You put me in the basement with the cold callers. This is a violation of my contract." Sarah finally looked up. Her gaze was terrifyingly calm. "Actually, Mr. Dawson, I've been reviewing your contract and your expense reports. It seems you have a habit of charging client dinners that suspiciously coincide with jewelry store purchases and weekend getaways to Napa." She slid a file across the table. It was a printout of his corporate Amex charges. Circled in red was a $5,000 charge at Tiffany & Co., dated 3 days before his divorce from Sarah. That's client appreciation," Richard stammered, sweating. "It looks like a diamond bracelet for your mistress," Sarah corrected, "which constitutes embezzlement of company funds. I could fire you right now. I could call the police." Richard fell into a chair, his legs giving out. "Please, I can explain. Don't fire me. I have a mortgage. I have car payments." "I know," Sarah said coldly. "I bought your debt too." Richard looked at her, confused. "What? The bank that holds the mortgage on your new penthouse? Obsidian Holdings acquired that portfolio this morning. You missed your payment yesterday, Richard. You're in default." I need a little time," Richard begged. The arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. "Just let me close the Anderson account. The commission is huge. It will cover everything." "The Anderson account?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I reassigned it." "To who?" Richard shrieked. "Nobody else can handle that deal." "I gave it to Amanda regarding. The single mother in accounting who you made fetch your dry cleaning for 2 years. She closed it an hour ago. She's getting the $50,000 commission." Richard felt like he was suffocating. He had no income. His assets were frozen. His career was in tatters. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. "You don't even know me." Sarah leaned forward. "Oh, I think I know exactly the kind of man you are. You discard people when they become inconvenient. You value money over loyalty. I'm just applying your own philosophy to your career." "You are currently inconvenient, Mr. Dawson." She stood up. "You will work from the 4th floor. You will be on a base salary of minimum wage plus commission. But since you have no clients, I suggest you start cold calling. If you quit, I will sue you for the embezzled funds and ensure you never work in this state again. Now, get out of my sight." Richard stumbled out of the room like a drunk man. When he got home that night to the penthouse he could no longer afford, the lights were off. "Tiffany?" he called out. There was no answer. He walked into the bedroom. The closet was empty. Her clothes, her shoes, her jewelry, gone. On the bed was a note written on the back of a coaster. "Rick, my dad told me you're being investigated for fraud. I can't be with a loser who works in a cubicle. I'm going to Cabo with my tennis instructor. Don't call me." Tiff Richard sank to the floor. In the span of 24 hours, he had lost his job status, his money, his fiancée, and his dignity. He sat in the dark, empty apartment, the silence ringing in his ears. It was the same silence he had left Sarah in at the hospital. But Richard didn't feel remorse. He felt victimized. He felt angry. And he decided he had one card left to play. He remembered the transition gala. He remembered the way Miss Sterling had looked at him. She was obsessed with him. That's why she was torturing him. It was a power play. She wanted him to beg. She wanted him to submit. He stood up, a delusional plan forming in his mind. He would go to her. He would charm her. He would seduce the billionaire boss, get her to drop the lawsuit, and maybe even marry into her fortune. He was Richard Dawson. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. He could certainly sell himself to a lonely, power-hungry woman. He went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and put on his last clean suit. One last close, he told his reflection. The biggest sale of your life. It was raining hard when Richard pulled his leased BMW, which he was hiding from the repo man, up to the gates of the Sterling estate. He had found the address in the company directory, listed under private residence. He pressed the intercom. "Delivery for Ms. Sterling," he lied. "We aren't expecting a delivery," a guard's voice crackled. "It's personal, from Richard Dawson. It's urgent legal paperwork regarding the company." There was a long pause. Richard held his breath. Then the heavy iron gates groaned and swung open. Richard drove up the winding driveway, his eyes widening at the sheer scale of the property. The mansion was massive, a Georgian masterpiece lit up against the storm. This woman was richer than he had even imagined. He parked and ran to the front door, shielding his hair from the rain. The door was opened by Abernathy. "Mr. Dawson," the butler said, his face unreadable. "You are trespassing." "I need to see her, Abernathy," Richard said, pushing past him into the foyer. "I know she's here. Tell her I'm here to negotiate my surrender." "She is in the drawing room," Abernathy said calmly. "But I would advise you to turn back." "I don't take advice from servants," Richard sneered. He straightened his tie and walked toward the double doors at the end of the hall. He pushed the doors open, a charming smile plastered on his face. "Miss Sterling, I think we got off on the wrong—" The words died in his throat. The room was warm, lit by a roaring fireplace. But it wasn't an office. It was a playroom. There were plush rugs on the floor, wooden blocks scattered about, and a large playpen in the corner. And in the center of the room, sitting on the rug, was the woman he knew as Ms. Sterling. But she wasn't wearing the emerald gown or the power suit. She was wearing jeans and a soft sweater. She had no makeup on, and she was holding 2 babies, while a third one tugged at her sleeve. She looked up. The cold corporate mask was gone. In its place was the face he had woken up to for 4 years, the face he had abandoned. "Sarah," Richard whispered. The world tilted on its axis. "Hello, Richard," she said quietly. She didn't get up. She continued rocking Emma, who was fussing slightly. Richard rubbed his eyes. This was a hallucination. No, this isn't possible. You're destitute. You live in a basement. I saw the credit report." "You saw what I wanted you to see," Sarah said. "Noah, sweetie, don't eat the block." She gently took a toy away from the boy who looked exactly like Richard. Richard took a stumbling step forward. His brain was trying to reconcile the terrifying Ms. Sterling with his boring ex-wife. You are the buyer? You are Obsidian Holdings?" "My grandmother was Beatrice Sterling," Sarah said, looking him dead in the eye. "She left me everything. I inherited it the week you walked out. While you were busy buying Tiffany bracelets, I was learning how to buy your life." Richard looked around the room. The opulence, the wealth, the power. It was all his, or it should have been. If he had just stayed. If he had just waited 1 more week. A sick, twisted hope bloomed in his chest. He was the father. These were his kids. That meant he had a claim. He dropped to his knees, not in sorrow, but in a performance of it. "Sarah," he choked out, forcing tears into his eyes. "Oh my God, I didn't know. I've been so lost without you." He crawled toward her across the rug. "I was an idiot. I was scared. The pressure of the babies. The job." I snapped. "But I never stopped loving you. Tiffany meant nothing to me. She was just a distraction from the pain of losing my family. He reached out to touch Liam's head. My sons. My beautiful daughter. Papa is home. Sarah stood up, handing Emma to a nanny who had quietly appeared from the shadows. Don't touch them, Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him cold. Sarah, baby, please, Richard pleaded, standing up and reaching for her hands. We can fix this. We can be a family again, a powerful family. You and me running the company, raising the kids here in this palace. It's fate. Why else would you buy my company if you didn't still love me? Sarah stared at him. For a moment, Richard thought he had won. He thought he saw a flicker of the old, submissive Sarah. Then she laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You think I bought the company to get you back? She asked. Of course, Richard smiled, his confidence returning. You wanted my attention? You got it. I forgive you for the rough patch. I'm ready to come home. Sarah walked over to a desk and picked up a document. She walked back to Richard and shoved it against his chest. Read it. Richard looked down. It was a document titled Termination of Parental Rights. I didn't buy the company to get you back, Richard, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. I bought it to ensure you never had the money to fight me in court. I bought it to destroy your reputation, so no judge would ever grant you custody. And I bought it so I could look you in the eye when I tell you this. She leaned in close. You are not their father. You are a sperm donor who breached his contract. You have 5 minutes to sign this document, relinquishing all rights to Liam, Noah, and Emma. If you sign, I will pay off your personal debt and give you enough money to leave the state. And if I don't? Richard challenged, trying to find some leverage. I'm their biological father. The courts will give me visitation. I'll be in your life forever. I'll make a scene. I'll tell the press Ms. Sterling is a vindictive ex-wife. Sarah smiled. If you don't sign, I will release the audit of your embezzlement to the FBI. I have proof you forged signatures on the Anderson account 3 years ago. You will go to federal prison for 10 years. You will miss their childhoods anyway. But this way, you'll do it from a cell, not a beach in Florida. Richard froze. He knew she wasn't bluffing. He looked at the triplets, who were happily playing, completely unaware of his existence. He looked at Sarah, who was looking at him like he was a stain on her carpet. He looked at the pen. Money. Or prison. Richard Dawson, the man who always made the selfish choice, didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? He asked. Sarah pointed to the line. Right there. And then, get out of my house. The silence in the drawing room was absolute, heavy enough to crush a man's lungs. The only sound was the scratching of the fountain pen against the heavy, cream-colored cardstock. To Richard Dawson, that sound was louder than thunder. It was the sound of a life ending and another beginning. He stared at the signature. Richard Dawson. It looked shaky, weak, nothing like the bold autograph he used to sign on real estate closings. He pushed the paper away, as if it burned him. It's done, he croaked, his voice barely audible. I've signed. They're yours. Legally, morally, completely. Sarah didn't flinch. She picked up the document with 2 fingers, as if it were something mildly distasteful, and inspected the signature. She didn't look at him with hatred or anger or even triumph. She looked at him with a terrifying, blank indifference. It was the look one gives to a stranger on a crowded subway train, a person who exists, but matters not at all. Abernathy, Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the paper. Give Mr. Dawson his check and see him out. Wait, Richard said, a sudden, desperate need for validation clawing at his throat. He looked toward the playpen where the triplets were still cooing softly, oblivious to the fact that their biological father had just sold them for the price of a mid-range sedan. "Sarah, tell them. Tell them I wanted to stay. Tell them I did this for them." Sarah finally looked at him. A small, cold smile touched her lips. "I won't tell them anything about you, Richard. You're not a villain in their story. You're not a hero. You're just absent. You're a blank page." The words hit him harder than a physical blow. Abernathy stepped forward, holding out a white envelope. Richard snatched it. $50,000. It felt light. Too light. He turned and walked out of the room, his shoes clicking on the hardwood for the last time. He passed the grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the oil paintings of ancestors he would never be part of. He stepped out into the night, where the rain had turned into a torrential downpour. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed through the courtyard, a final, resonant thud that severed his connection to the Sterling dynasty forever. Richard ran to his car, hunched against the rain. He threw himself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, gasping for air. He ripped open the envelope to check the check. It was real. 50,000. "I won," he whispered to the dashboard, his hands shaking violently. "I stayed out of prison. I have cash. I'm free." He started the engine, the wipers slashing frantically against the windshield. As he drove down the winding driveway, leaving the mansion behind, he tried to summon the old arrogance, the old Richard who could spin any disaster into a win. But as the lights of the estate faded in his rearview mirror, swallowed by the storm, a cold, gnawing emptiness settled in his gut. He had traded a diamond mine for a pocketful of gravel, and deep down, in the place where his soul used to be, he knew he had just made the worst deal of his life. The Florida sun was not kind. It was a relentless, bleaching force that beat down on the cracked pavement of the Sunny Isles Strip Mall in Fort Lauderdale. The humidity was thick enough to chew, smelling of exhaust fumes and frying oil from the fast food joint next door. Inside the cramped glass-fronted office of Paradise Vacation Solutions, the air conditioning was broken again. A fan in the corner rattled rhythmically, doing nothing to cool the stagnant air that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Richard Dawson sat at a cheap laminate desk, loosening his tie. He was 40 years old, but he looked 50. His once thick, styled hair was thinning rapidly, revealing a sun-spotted scalp. His waistline had expanded, spilling over the belt of his polyester suit pants, a result of 5 years of microwave dinners, cheap beer, and stress. "I'm telling you folks, this isn't just a vacation," Richard said, leaning forward. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. He flashed a smile that showed too many teeth, a desperate mimicry of the charm he once possessed. "It's an investment in your family's happiness. 2 weeks a year in a premium condo. Think of the memories." The couple across from him, sunburned tourists from Ohio, looked unimpressed. They exchanged a glance. "It's a lot of money up front," the husband said, crossing his arms. "And we read online about the maintenance fees." "Ignore the blogs." Richard laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Those are written by people who don't understand value. Look, I can talk to my manager. Maybe I can knock 10% off the signing fee. But only if you sign right now." "We're going to pass," the wife said, standing up and grabbing her purse. "Come on, Jerry." "Wait." Richard stood up, knocking over his cup of pencils. "I can throw in a voucher for a dinner cruise. Don't walk away from this." They walked away. The door chime jingled cheerfully as they left, a mocking sound that grated on Richard's nerves. He collapsed back into his chair, putting his head in his hands. His life had become a series of closing doors. After he left California, Tiffany had left him within a month. She had sniffed out the scent of failure on him like a bloodhound. She married a plastic surgeon in Miami and blocked Richard's number. The $50,000 had evaporated in less than a year, swallowed by bad investments, car repairs, and an attempt to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford. He had been blacklisted from high-end real estate. Sarah hadn't sued him, but the whispers of embezzlement and fraud followed him like a shadow. Now he was here, selling low-rent timeshares to people who couldn't afford them, working for a boss who was half his age and twice as stupid. "Hey, Rick," Richard winced. His boss, a 25-year-old named Kyle, who wore gold chains and too much cologne, stuck his head out of the back office. "You blew that sale, man. That's the third one this week. You're losing your touch." "I'm just having a bad run, Kyle," Richard muttered, wiping his forehead with a fast food napkin. "Yeah, well, snap out of it. And turn up the TV in the lobby. The big game is over. The news is on. I want to see the weather." Richard sighed and grabbed the sticky remote control. He pointed it at the small, dust-covered television mounted in the corner of the waiting area. He turned the volume up. It wasn't the weather. It was a national news special report. Live from San Francisco, where the city is celebrating the grand opening of the Sterling Pediatric Center, the news anchor announced. The state-of-the-art facility, fully funded by the Sterling Foundation, promises to provide free health care to single mothers and their children. Richard froze. The name hung in the air like smoke. Sterling. He spun his chair around, his eyes locking onto the grainy screen. The camera cut to a live feed of a podium in front of a gleaming glass hospital. And there she was. Sarah. She didn't look like the woman he had divorced. She didn't even look like the woman who had handed him the check 5 years ago. She looked ethereal. She was wearing a tailored white suit that seemed to glow in the California sunlight. Her hair was cut in a sharp, powerful bob. She stood tall, radiating a kind of magnetic confidence that Richard had never seen in anyone, let alone the woman he used to tell to stop nagging. She was beautiful. Intimidatingly, painfully beautiful. "I built this place," Sarah spoke into the cluster of microphones, her voice steady and echoing over the crowd, "because I remember what it feels like to be alone. I remember the fear of holding a sick child and checking your bank account to see if you can afford the doctor. No mother should ever have to make that choice." The crowd erupted in applause. Richard felt a lump form in his throat, hard and jagged. "But I didn't do this alone," Sarah continued, her expression softening. "I did this for the 3 people who taught me what strength really means. My inspiration. My heart." She gestured to the side of the stage. 3 children ran out. Richard stopped breathing. They were 5 years old now. There was Liam, tall for his age, with messy dark hair and a mischievous grin, looking like a miniature heartbreaker in his little blazer. There was Noah, the quiet one, holding a book, adjusting his glasses that looked just like the ones Richard's father used to wear. And there was Emma. She was a vision in a floral dress, her hair in pigtails, laughing as she ran to hug Sarah's legs. They were perfect. They were healthy, happy, and loved. Sarah knelt down, scooping Emma up into her arms while Liam and Noah leaned against her sides. It was a tableau of a perfect family, a complete unit. "These are my children," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Liam, Noah, and Emma, they are the Sterling legacy, and I promise you I will spend every day of my life making sure they grow up to be men and women of integrity, people who stay, people who build rather than destroy." The camera zoomed in on the family. The caption on the bottom of the screen read, "Billionaire philanthropist Sarah Sterling and her triplets." "Whoa," Kyle said, walking out of his office and leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. He whistled low. "Check her out. That is one serious woman. Richest lady on the West Coast, they say. And single, too." Richard stared at the screen, his eyes burning. He could see the resemblance. Liam had his chin. Noah had his brow. They were pieces of him, living a life of unimaginable privilege and love, thousands of miles away. "Can you imagine?" Kyle laughed, shaking his head. The story is her husband dumped her right after she had those kids, left her high and dry before she got the money. Can you imagine being that guy? Richard felt the room spinning. The heat, the smell of grease, the sound of the rattling fan, it all crashed down on him. "Yeah," Richard whispered, his voice cracking into a dry sob. "I mean, seriously," Kyle continued, oblivious to the devastation happening 3 feet away from him. "That guy must be the biggest idiot on the planet. He probably drives off a bridge every time he sees her face." Richard stared at the TV. On the screen, Sarah looked directly into the camera lens. For a terrifying second, it felt like she was looking right through the glass, across the continent, into the dingy office in Florida. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't sad. They were victorious. She had won. She had won everything. Richard saw his own reflection in the dark glass of the TV screen, superimposed over Sarah's radiant face. He saw a man in a cheap suit, sweating, alone, with nothing to his name but a history of mistakes. "He is," Richard said, a single tear leaking out and tracking through the sweat on his cheek. "He is the biggest idiot on the planet." Sarah waved to the crowd, hugged her children tight, and the screen cut back to the news anchor. Richard picked up the remote and turned the TV off. The screen went black. The vision of the life he could have had, the wealth, the family, the legacy, vanished, leaving him alone in the silence. He looked at the phone on his desk. He had a list of numbers to call, people to bother, lies to sell. He picked up the receiver, the plastic slippery in his hand. The dial tone hummed, a monotonous, unending sound that stretched out into the rest of his empty life. That is the story of Sarah Sterling and Richard Dawson. It serves as a powerful reminder that arrogance is a fragile thing, and karma has a way of balancing the scales in the end. Richard made a choice based on greed and vanity, thinking he was discarding a burden. Instead, he discarded his own future. He walked away from his family to chase a pot of gold, never realizing the true treasure was the people he left behind in that hospital room. Sarah's journey from a heartbroken, abandoned mother to a titan of industry proves that rock bottom can be the solid foundation on which you build a new life. She turned her pain into power, her grief into grit, and built an empire not just for herself, but for her children. Richard ended up with exactly what he gave, nothing. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more dramas like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. I have a question for you. Do you think Richard's punishment was enough? Does living a life of regret make up for what he did? Or did he deserve to go to prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.